Jeff, you want
Well,
to?
I was going to ask, for the benefit of the congregations involved, if you'll tell us who you are and what you're doing, and give them kind of a place to start as we hear from you. This will be on a Sunday morning, so let us know who you are, and maybe even how you found yourself to be where you are. You're a long way from New Mexico.
Yeah, it's true. So I'm Robert Gamble. Um, I am the child of I'm a Navy officer. I grew up in Bermuda, Florida, Puerto Rico, and California. I went to the Coast Guard Academy and got a degree there at the Coast Guard Academy and spent 5 years as an officer in the Coast Guard. And as I joke all the time, after being in the Coast Guard and pastor of churches and now in Ukraine, I'm still in the life saving business. So I can't seem to get away from that.
Yeah.
Um, so I was the pastor of the First Presbyterian Church in Daytona Beach um, for 9 years, and near the end of that time in 2005, I had a sabbatical and I went to Ukraine. I'll just tell you briefly why I went to Ukraine. At that time, I was involved with starting a Hungarian congregation in my church. I met Hungarians in Daytona Beach, Eastern Europeans, and I really enjoyed these people. I went to Hungary. I saw Eastern Europe, which is different than Western Europe. So I had this introduction to Eastern Europe. At the same time, I was running trips to Nicaragua during the summer to work. The deal was work for a week in the orphanage, and I give you a week of surfing. So I'm a surfer. So that's how I get young people to go to Nicaragua and work in an orphanage. um, and and that's because I was in Nicaragua during the '80s in the war, and the war was there. But I went back in the '90s, not for a political reason, but to help kids in orphanages. So I was interested in orphans, and I was interested in Eastern Europe. And when I got the sabbatical, I happened to meet a guy on the fantail of a casino cruise ship going out of Port Canaveral, which it happens to be the port I was stationed at on a Coast Guard cutter back in the '70s. So, I was eager to kind of see the land from the sea, and I didn't care about gambling, and I'd lost $20 already. So I was talking to some stranger, complete stranger, about about my work, about Nicaragua, and he said, "Well, wait a minute. If you want to help orphans, you got to go to Ukraine. There's 80,000." And he happened to be a Florida lawyer who was doing adoptions out of Ukraine. So that stuck in my head, and when I came to decide about what to do about the sabbatical, I thought, well, Eastern Europe, orphans, I'll go to Ukraine. And so I did. And in that time, in August, September of 2005, in my time in Ukraine, I saw not kids in orphanages. I wasn't able to even get in an orphanage. I just saw thousands of street kids. They were living underneath buildings down in the. I mean, I didn't see thousands. I thought saw a lot, and there were thousands living on the streets in those years. That's exactly 15 years after the fall of the Soviet Union. And if you do the math, and go backwards, when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1990, it was a extremely difficult time economically for all those countries. And over there, sometimes that means there's not much money, but there's always money for alcohol or vodka, and someone's going to get abused, and it's not going to be the man in the house. And so, unfortunately, there was a lot of child abuse by neglect or by various things in those early years. And when I showed up, those kids were all teenagers. And when they're teens, they left home, went to the street, or they were given to an orphanage by a single parent, which happens a lot over there, um, and they left the orphanage and went to the streets. So anyway, but in time, that population of street kids dwindled down to practically nobody, no kids on the street by 2010. And by that time, we had already begun to work in orphanages with teams. An idea was to get kids to stay and not to leave for the streets. And then we got the bright idea of training foster families to take kids from orphanages. We're always like looking for what's the source of the problem. And we knew that a child in a family was better than an orphanage. And for a long time, I was like kind of take it or leave it with orphanages, but I finally decided to myself that it was the institutionalization of children is not proper, not good. And so we were doing that. By 2014, the war began. We started to train teenagers in peacemaking techniques. We did that with the Ukrainian Academy of Sciences. They paid for the dormitories and food, and I paid the staff to teach. And this was a really rigorous. Um, they would meet 3 times for uh, for 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 like 4 days each in Kiev, and it was like 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. every day, learning techniques to work with groups of people to resolve conflict
Mm.
and examining your own prejudices. Um, all that continued with foster family training. We were doing camps for families displaced by the war. We were doing camps for foster families in the summertime. But COVID hit and slowed everything down. Um, and as COVID was winding out, or it's really not gone, obviously right now. But um, when the invasion began, that changed everything, and we had to drop all those programs. And I moved from Odessa, where my home base was, to Ismail, and shifted to working with families displaced by the war. So there may be a point at which we go back to training foster families, but I kind of doubt it because now the amount of work we're looking at in terms of helping these families, in terms of one day rebuilding in Ukraine, all that, this is where we are going to be working. So I've learned a lot. Families essentially come to the West. They come to our city of Ismail. They go to social services, you call it that, and they uh, get a stipend from the government if they sign up or sign in. And on the door is a note that says, if you want further help, call this number. And it's the cell phone of our program manager. So every weekend we meet families at grocery stores and we say, get what you need, and we pay for it. These are new families, or sometimes they're families that have some disabilities. A blind woman, someone with special needs children, we help them too as well. But this is how we meet families. So when the invasion first began and people first began coming, we were meeting families every day, a couple of times a day in grocery stores. But we kept track of who the names of these families and their phone numbers and stuff like that. So when the invasion began the end of February, by like all through March and April, we were doing this. Then we would start thinking about a camp in the summer. And so with that, all those names, we started we planned 2 camps. I call them camps. They're really uh, they're a week at an old Soviet resort, which is just a big, ugly building near the beach. Um, and it's inexpensive. And so then we had 100 people because we took 2 groups of 50. And when they came back from that summer, we then decided I pushed forward. Let's find buildings to rent. Let's rent something for sports and something for creative activities. And so we did, and we called all those people, invited them to come, and we started, figuring out what to do. And we worked our way in terms of, first of all, helping with things like handcrafts, um, singing, group work, therapy work with mothers, and we kept refining it. Now we've got a music club. We had instruments too, and we do a lot of singing and make a lot of music. We are always like thinking about creativity. It's kind of seems like if you look at Abraham Maslow's pyramid, And, at the bottom, you got these basic needs and security and safety and so forth. And you move on up to, you know, community or friendships, relationships, and you're going to get to the top there, and think about self actualization. But really, at the top, it's kind of this place where people feel the need then to create, and you can also stand that thing on its head and start beginning with creativity and work the other way too. But I saw we saw these people move from being almost kind of catatonic, to functioning to really functioning well, um, and and uh, we just kept tuning what we would do to see and make that happen for them. Um, the Body Keeps Score is a important book for us. Basically it says that trauma damages you emotionally and then or physically and then as well, and but it also works backwards. So what you do physically helps you heal from trauma. And the most dramatic example of that is when you put somebody in the water. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm a surfer, so granted, I've got a, I lean that way anyway. But when you some of these kids were, think about this, 2 to 6 weeks on the basement of a building, while upstairs there's mortar fire, tank fire, there's rockets hitting, all the time. What does that do to a child? But they get in the you get in the water and you give them goggles and they go under, and it's silent. You can imagine the kind of dramatic healing that can come from that experience. So seeing kids in the water, playing in the water with their mothers, um, it- that's just been fantastic for these people. So now we're up to now having 3 camps this summer. 150 people will go to Bulgaria for this kind of experience. Um, so that kind of, like, I guess that's an overview of how I started, how we started when the war came, and what we are doing at this time.
Wow.
Kind of incredible, Bob.
Yeah. 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 Well, I was going to ask, how has your organization goals changed due to the war? But I think you covered that pretty well.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, I will tell you the next step for us, and I'm reading a book called Between Two Kingdoms. It's a really good book. It's about a woman who survived cancer, and she writes a column for the New York Times, and she's become a well-known speaker now. But she says something very important, because that book, it's divided into 2 parts, and there's a time when she has cancer, and there's a time after. And she said that the really difficult work begins after. And so we're already thinking ahead to when this war ends. I mean, what's that going to be like for these people? Because then you're talking about, you're not going to have those endorphins and adrenaline because there's a war going on here. You're gonna go. Are you gonna go home? What are you gonna do? And one way that we believe we're gonna succeed with this is that we're trying to place kids in educational universities and schools in the States.
Hmm.
We got 4 kids that can go to college. We're trying to place them. There's a program called Global Student Haven Initiative, where some really good colleges like Dartmouth and Pomona and NYU and Williams and Smith, and Bowdoin in Maine give a free ride to Ukrainian students.
Mm.
And so if they can qualify for those schools, then that'll be good. We're trying to place kids in 10th grade and high school, because then there'll be this kind of like future ahead for that family that's being kind of led by our child's in school in the States. And so this is a really, really hopeful thing for us. And plus it'll help really now, because frankly, it's been difficult to go to school we get 3 air raids a day here, or sometimes 2 air raids a day. We haven't been hit by drones since the last fall, but then they just completely destroyed the ports outside the window here. Um, Near me. So they destroyed the port offices and the commercial offices too at the port. But still, when the air raid goes off, by law, kids go down to their shelters, and so they they go underground to these shelters, and a lot of times school ends there. Um, they're getting creative in some other cities in Ukraine. I think it's Kharkiv, where they've taken the subway system and turned it into an educational facility. Instead of all those glass shops where you buy trinkets and garbage, they're all classrooms now. Um, 5 subway stations in Kharkiv are that way. That's a big university town, by the way, too. So anyway, going to school in the States, of course, would just be a wonderful thing for any child. But that's just part of what we're trying to think about down the road.
You know what's breaking my brain that
What?
you've talked about is, and I wasn't prepared for this, but you talked earlier about the first time you went to the Ukraine, 15 years after the fall of the Soviet Union, and how there were these preteens and teenage young adults and kids that had no family or that were on their own.
Yeah.
And we're doing this series on peacemaking for Lent. That's why we wanted to contact you. And clearly the Ukraine is in a war, but your peacemaking work started before the war.
Yeah.
Like you identified the need for that kind of ministry and comfort and an oasis and a place for people outside of a war. And I think for a lot of people, myself included, we think of peacemaking as something you do in response to war, but it's not, is it? It's something you have, because you said something earlier about there's stress and there's economic problems, but there's always enough money for vodka, and there's always someone in the house that can beat the rest of them up. Well, that's a need for peacemaking. That's a peacemaking issue right there in a family unit.
Yeah, it is. It is.
It is kind of incredible how it reframes all of that this is not about some place that's far away. But I mean, when we look at the streets of Albuquerque, they probably look a lot like what you were describing when you went 15 years ago.
One day, an interesting thing happened. I was underground because I spent hours and hours underground with these kids, and the manhole covers above me, and it's nighttime, and they said because I know all these kids now. Said, Robert, go get some matches for us, and the word for matches is spichki, but the word for candle is svechki. And I wasn't really that good in Russian, and I went upstairs, and I went to the little market thing, and I said svechki. I said the word for candle instead of matches, and she said, "How many do you want?" I said, "Oh, I want a lot of them," and because I was thinking I was saying matches, and give me what we got, So she went and gets all the candles she has in a little cardboard box, and so I buy them all, and I go back now, and I'm so proud, I have all these candles. And and they look at it and they say, well, we meant matches, not candles. But we took these candles and we set them up underground and we lit them all. And it was remarkable. You're looking at this place underground, which is full of trash and pipes for water and sewage and all that. And there were candles everywhere. And it just dawned on me that, wow, here's a moment of peace. And it's not that they have to actually get out of there and be in this nice home and all that kind of stuff. You can address the issue of peace right where you are. This this woman with the book about cancer says, she says, you know, don't wait till you're well again. You have to learn to function in your life with where you are at the moment. Um, and you know, and start right there. So I think I think a lot of us, myself included, are waiting for that time down the road when we can really make it happen. But you got to look right now.